Hello and welcome to another episode of Coaching from the Heart with myself, Tyler Thurman, and my good friend, colleague, and co host, Harold Feddersen.
Hi, Tyler.
Hi, Harold. It's lovely to be with you today again, as always.
Yes,
And
the pleasure is actually more mine than yours, even.
well, we could spend some time arguing about it.
We could.
But let's get to the topic at hand, which is it is hidden agreements and expectations. And we're going to talk a little bit about that after we give out your contact information.
Okay. So I have a couple places that people can find me. I have a blog called hearttohandblog.wordpress.com. And I also have a Facebook page, which is Harold Feddersen, The Awakening Heart. And you could always email me directly at haroldfeddersen@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Thank you. And if you are interested in reaching out to me, you can find all my contact information on my blog, Coach Ty, at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And Harold and I are both transformative coaches and teachers. And so if you're interested in working with us more than just this show, feel free to reach out and we'd love to hear from you. So let's go ahead and get started. Harold, do you want to set the table with our topic at hand?
Yeah, so this was actually, I believe you were the one who actually introduced me to the paradigm that we're going to talk about today. Because you and I were having a conversation about trust one day, and uh, and you had said, well, trust is actually a little bit of an illusion. What really is happening is an agreement. And I thought, well, that is genius. So our conversation today is about unspoken expectations in relationship, whatever kind of relationship, that goes, what's hidden, it's an unspoken expectation or agreement with another person.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So what for you? What is that?
so for me, what that means is we're in relationship with someone, and we have an understanding on our side of the fence of how the relationship, certain aspects of the relationship should go, and yet they're not spoken. So I act from the place that you already know that I'm expecting this.
Hmm.
Uh, and then when you don't align with that, because you honestly don't know it exists, because it's just in my head as an expectation, then there becomes a conflict, either in our relationship or just within me.
Right. Right. That's well said. Well to the point. I think um, it's really this is really important to know about because essentially we're in relationship with everything, right? It's I'm in relation to you or to this thing or to this person, to this place. Um, so, relationships, when we say that, it's not just our romantic relationships or relationships with our family. It's business. It's someone you bump into on the street. It's the person you pass in traffic. We're in relationship with everybody, whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not. And so understanding this idea is paramount to navigating relationships and having wonderful relationships and just relationships that work well, or smoothly in my experience. And so, I love what you said, and I just want to, use my own language a little bit there and say, hidden expectations. Now, you mentioned the unspoken part, But it can even go a little bit deeper than that, can it? Because we cannot even know that we have them. So it
Yeah.
so it's actually can be hidden to us and the other person.
Yeah.
Now how that manifests is, we'll have an expectation or an idea or a rule that we think somebody else should follow, um, and we think it's this concrete thing. It somehow exists in the world outside of my mind and outside of my partner's mind, or just the other person's mind. It's this thing that it's just there, and I can see it, so surely they can see it. And that's the first mistake, right? Expectations are always in our own mind. Um, they exist in the mind, and they're just thinking that we have in the form of some kind of guideline, right? I think you should behave, speak or act in certain ways, and if you don't, uh, you know, you'll be sorry. Yes. That's kind of the unspoken part of the the expectation, right? There's if you violate this, there will be some kind of um, punishment necessary. So it just causes all sorts of issues in relationship if we don't know about it, and or if we know about it and we don't communicate it with the other person. Our partners, believe it or not, cannot read our minds most of the time, if ever, right? Um, and so it's just this, it's just essential to navigating relationships to understand there's this stuff in my mind that is there, that it's there for everybody, right? We have guidelines and expectations for everybody we meet, right? And usually the longer we've known someone, the more we have for them, right? And so it's just it's really important to know about them first and foremost, and also know that they're kind of going on pretty much all the time, right?
And I think, yeah, it probably goes without saying, but communication is one of the four corners of a healthy relationship. So, um, bringing the awareness of these expectations forward in ourselves and then forward into our relationships gives us the opportunity to then communicate with the other person, whether it's romantic or family or business or wherever the relationship is occurring. It gives us that opportunity to then have that conversation.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's I can't stress how much it's important, but it's also relevant to everybody, right?
Hmm.
So if you're asking the question, is this conversation for me or is this going to be helpful? Yes, and yes. Right?
If you interact with another human being,
If
this
you
is good.
have, if you ever have and ever will in the future, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just, it's we most people most of the time are unaware that this is going on, and it's um, an integral part of how we end up relating to people, based on what we think about them and how we think they should be behaving. Now there's a before we dive too deep into it, I just want to put this in here, and I think this might be a topic for another day, but it's an important part of it, which is expectations are made up, right? They're not based in anything real. So when I said there's no expectations, there's no real guidelines, besides like societal laws, right, outside us, and those that's a different thing entirely. um, but expectations, in the mind, those aren't concrete. So it's important to know that we have conjured those, or we've accumulated them throughout our life, right? We learn by our role models. We say, okay, this is how people are supposed to behave, speak and act um, in different situations, right? It's usually different for different people, different situations. There's different appropriate behavior and non-appropriate behavior, appropriate things to say, inappropriate things to say. Um, it's important to know that that is um, it's made up. Which, if we know that, then the level at which we can intervene is there, right? So we can intervene at the level of, well, maybe I could change my mind about this, as opposed to where we usually go is, well, I have to change the other person, right?
Clearly, the other person needs to change to match up with our previously unspoken expectations.
Yeah, and just unrealized. So, and that's the problem with thinking that it's something solid outside us, right? Um, we have to come up with an expectation for somebody else, and um, and then behave accordingly, right? But first and foremost, it has to be made up by us in our minds. So let's go ahead and we'll start with, let's get specific if we can. So let's start with romantic relationships, Harold, and
Mm,
maybe you can share
yeah,
some common examples, and
those
even
are always
personal experience if you want.
personal experience. Let's open up this can of worms.
That's right.
Yeah, I think well, I think one of the big ones would be expectations of gender roles in romantic relationships that are just sort of there, that aren't brought forward. So
Mhm.
to just use stereotype um,
Yeah, like societal
ones,
stereotypes,
yeah,
right?
like like in the old days, we'll say, back when I was growing up,
That's right.
the unspoken expectation was that the man would go out and work and the woman would stay at home. And
And raise
I
kids and
think,
cook and clean and
yeah, and we live in such a different society now than we did when I was a little tyke, um, because now, the gender equality has opened up. Um, it's opened up the conversation about expectations.
hmm.
Um, so I have, often run across people who are kind of trying to navigate the old world and the new world. So you've got,
Right.
working women who are married with children, and some of those old roles have still been carried forward, like laundry and dishes, for example, um, even though um, they're working full time, as is the spouse. In this case, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
uh, husband and wife. Um, and they just kind of exist, but there's a friction because you've got two sets of agreements often working. This is super stereotyped. Like this isn't. Um,
Yeah, it's not true. It's
yeah.
just an idea that um, a large amount of people have had or still do have within our society.
Hmm. So there's an unspoken expectation that often the wife is going to take on some of those domestic duties,
Right.
um, whether or not she has that expectation or not. Um, so I think that's one sort
So
of easy
there,
one to just grab.
so you're saying there's an expectation in the mind of the man.
Yeah. and
Yeah.
possibly even in the mind of the woman,
Right. It
because
could be
you see,
both.
it could be both. Yeah, I have some female friends who are like superheroes that work full time, and plus they do all these other things that in a more uh, equal playing field would be shared more than they are currently.
Yeah. Now I just want to interject briefly there to make an important point that it's it can be particularly treacherous if you both think you have the same expectations
Nice, very nice.
and
Yeah,
have never spoken about them, right? And even
yeah.
if you speak about them, they're going to be different. Um, because what we do is we conjure it in our mind, right? And so even if you've talked about it and said, this is kind of how I'd like things to be, and your partner says, oh yeah, this is kind of how I'd like things to be too. There's gonna be a different version in your mind from their mind.
Hmm.
It's like a snowflake. It can't be the same. It can't be exactly the same. And so if you think it is, that's where you're going to get into some trouble. If you know that it can't be the same, you can navigate that. But if you're
Hmm.
under the illusion or delusion that, you know, that we're both thinking the same thing about this, then you're almost certainly wrong. Um, and so if you know, hey, we're just going to have different worldviews because that's the reality of having, at least seemingly separate minds, right?
Hmm. And then bringing those forward, and then having a conversation where both people can where you can create a win-win situation.
Absolutely. Like the best bet is we become aware of it ourselves. Hey, I've got this idea about, you know, the kind of, in this case, home life or just shared experience of life that I would like with this person. And I know it's going to be different than theirs. Let's talk about it. You know, let's get close to, let's create an agreement, a spoken, or in the case of marriage, written agreement uh, that says, yeah, we both agree to this, but we also both know differences are going to come up because that's how the mind works. And so that can be the trickiest version of hidden expectations and agreements um, to navigate, right? And so the first and most important part probably is I'm aware that they're never going to be exactly the same. And yeah, so you got anything there to add?
And well, I was actually thinking about how you have a neat, because we've talked about this a number of times. You have a really great view on entering marriage,
Hmm.
and and that whole, maybe you'll speak about that,
Yeah,
entering into.
remind me again what exactly is on your mind. This is a great example of this, right? Because I'm not. I know that we've had this conversation, but I'm not sure exactly which part of it you're talking about. So
Yeah, so I was thinking about you've said before how people enter into marriage without being clear on what the actual marriage agreement is, because
right.
marriage for one person is not the same as what marriage for another person is, even though there's just this general sort of, oh, we're getting married,
Okay.
and both people are like, yeah, we're getting married, and what marriage means for one person is not necessarily what it means for the other person.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. And yeah, I mean, you put it very well. But for those of you who don't know, I am married. A couple years now, getting close to a couple years, anyways. And what I've found in my own experience of life and relationship and working with clients on the topic of relationships, right, is a conversation that almost never occurs that would save people an awful lot of trouble is, hey, honey, or hey, loved one, what does marriage mean to you? Um, can we talk about that? And let's go into some detail, right? Sex, living arrangements, you know,
Money,
likes, dislikes, money. Yeah, yeah. Um,
children.
children. Yeah, some you hear about these marriages you get 10 years, 5, 10 years down the road. You're like, hey, do you want kids? You're like, what?
Yeah.
You're just asking me now? Yeah, I thought we had this conversation. Oh, that was in my head? We had that conversation in my head, apparently. And that's what happens, right? Is we make up that these things are assumed. These things are agreed upon. I get along so well with this person. Surely they're going to have the same ideas about this that I do.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
great way to put that right there. Because I get along with them so well, they must see the world the way I see the world.
exactly. And there's always going to be differences. No matter how close you are, and if you know that, it can really make a relationship even just that much more beautiful, right? Because you can really just learn to love those differences and at the very least make peace with them, right? Or if if they're non-negotiables for you, you can get out, you know,
Hmm.
before 10 years shows up, right? Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because I'm sure that those people have learned some things, in that relationship. So it's not that finding out 10 years in is spells doom for you, but better now than never. um but it's yeah, it's we just not only do we have expectations within a relationship, but we have these assumptions about how relationships are supposed to go in general, and then we think that is a, a shared worldview, right, by everybody, or at least by the person I'm with, um, and we don't even think to ask. And so I mean, that's just one of many examples. The hey, what does marriage mean to you? It could be, what is a relationship? What is your ideal relationship? Or how do you want this relationship to go? Guess what? You can kind of create a relationship the way you want. It's a co-creation, right? Because it's with the other person.
Hmm.
Um, but that's a
And
novel idea to a lot of people. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you hit on a great point there too, is what kind of relationship do you want? Because some people enter into relationship thinking, well, I am looking for, you know, my soulmate, the the um, the matched person that I expect to spend the rest of my life with.
Right.
And if you enter into a relationship with that, without speaking it, the other person may or may not be interested in creating the same kind of relationship. So a lot of people enter into relationship without even being clear about what it is they want. They
Mm.
just, for a lot of people, and now I'm going sideways off our topic, so I'll leave it. But a lot of people enter into relationships simply because they want to avoid um, loneliness.
Right. Right.
So I think it's really great to be clear about what, because it lends into, be clear about what it is you want, because it does lead into what kind of agreements you want to enter into.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we can have a conversation for another day, right?
Yeah.
About just how to create a wonderful relationship in general.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, on the topic of agreements, it's just speak it into being, and know it's a fluid thing because our mind is fluid, although some of ours can be fairly rigid, right? But that doesn't mean that our ideas don't change over time. Of course they do, but we don't take that into account. And
Hmm.
so don't have the conversation once. Keep having it. It's a conversation is let's enter into this conversation for the rest of our relationship. It's
Hmm.
let's be in this conversation as a way of being in the relationship. And to me that has just like my relationship with my wonderful wife is much different than it was when it started, but it's wonderful. It's probably better than it was when it started because we had to learn how to live together, right? Imagine two human beings living together, right? That have completely different ideas about how the world's supposed to work, how relationships are supposed to work. But if you have some ideas about how the mind works and how we formulate these agreements and these guidelines for people without even knowing it, uh, it helps, right? There's a saying that I can't remember where I first heard it, to be honest with you, but it goes something like, if you're nuts, but you know you're nuts, you're not that nuts. Right. So if we have some, if we could just create some awareness about what's going on in our head, we can take that into account. And believe it or not, it makes a huge difference.
Hmm. Yeah, I like how you put that with the fluid nature of a relationship. Because you might not. So just as an example, let's pretend I have an expectation that the my partner does the laundry.
Mm.
Um, and let's pretend this causes her an extreme amount of frustration. This is not an actual thing.
You've
Um,
never had the.
but if I have the expectation that my partner should do the laundry, and I don't even know I have that, then as soon as I become aware of that, I can bring that forward in conversation. I can say, wow, I just realized I actually expect that you're going to do the laundry. And then my partner might say, yeah, I hate doing laundry. I hate doing your laundry and my laundry. And then it creates the opportunity for me to then, from a place of love, change my expectation.
Mm.
Because as you said, it's just a thought structure. It's just
It's
a
made
way
up.
that yeah, it's made of. It's a thing that I think should go this way. And so that's part of that, creating that fluid and healthy relationship. And I like when you said, it makes the relationship more beautiful because that's really what we want to do in all of our relationships is just have beautiful relationships,
Yeah.
whether it's with coworkers or our spouses or partners or friends or family or whatever. That's what we want, that rich, textured and alive, um, beautiful connection.
Right. Right.
And the connection comes when there's clarity between people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just want to take it another direction in the sense that if you're concerned, because I've had this come up with clients, that your partner's not gonna want to have this conversation with you.
Yeah.
Just start it with yourself, right? It's start it with yourself. Look within, because pretty much the worst thing we can always do is point the finger at our partner. Right? That's a good way for things to go downhill quickly.
Yeah, and there are two
Um,
fingers in particular you don't want to use. The
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So what's the saying? If you have one finger pointed outside, there's four pointed back at you.
yeah.
Um, but just start it with yourself. Start exploring. Hey, this happens with me. This is going on with me all the time. I'm the one that has picked up these ideas about how things should be within this relationship or any relationship. And I'm the one that, in a nutshell, what I'm doing when I create an expectation or a guideline for somebody else is I'm saying, when this person or that person behaves in this way, that action has the power to make me unhappy, or to take, to go big or go home. It has the power to take the peace of God from me, to go in a spiritual direction. Um, and and that's a self-imposed limitation on our own innate well-being. Um, so it's important to know, because a lot of relationship counseling would go in the direction of, let's help you both fulfill your expectations, right?
Mm.
Let's just try to meet in the middle, right? In my experience, it's much more helpful to go in the direction of, let's look at the nature of expectation and see that it's all made up. It's a fiction,
Hmm.
right? It's that thing. Essentially, what we can do is we can change our relationship to expectation. We don't even have to get rid of the expectations. We can just not take them so seriously, right? So we all have opinions, and that's essentially what an expectation is. It's an opinion about how somebody else should behave. Um, and some people take their opinions very seriously. Other people don't take them so seriously. That's something I've had to learn and am still learning in my life, is how to not take my own opinions, which are just made up thinking, even if it's informed thinking, quote unquote informed. Um, it's still made up. It's still not based on all the facts, because we can never be aware of all the facts.
Hmm.
It's a judgment about how things are supposed to be. We don't have to take that as gospel, even if it comes from us, right? We think everything that comes from us has to be gospel. Well, this is how I think it is, so this is how it should be, this is how it has to be. Well, that's clearly not the case, because our ideas change all the time.
Yeah, I like the advice there where if you're not sure your partner's going to be open to the conversation, that's a whole other thing. If
It's a whole,
you're,
yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
yeah, so okay, I won't go there at all. But another option, which I think works really well for a lot of people, is to open the door for the other person. You know, what do you find that I expect of you? Because, like you said, right when we opened the show here, is oftentimes we aren't even aware that we have the expectations.
Exactly.
So you can always just open the door, to the other person. What do you notice that I seem to expect from you? And then all of a sudden they can shine a light um, on something that you may not even be aware that you're doing,
Right.
which then gives you the opportunity to say, oh, here it is. This is my, um, here's my expectation that I've been holding. I kind of um, like a nugget that is in the dark and is brought to the light, and now we can look at it and say, oh, this is what it is. So
Mm,
now what do I want to do with this? Do I want to keep holding on to it because I find it valuable, or am I willing to shift it, or am I willing to let it go completely?
right.
Because it's, as you've said a couple times, it's just something that exists in your head. It's just it's not an actual real thing.
It's make believe.
It's make believe.
It's make believe. But the important part is, we forgot that we made it up.
Yeah.
Now, I love what you said about opening the door. I think that's beautiful, and I think that piggybacks, backs to uh, the starting with us bit, because to create a feeling space, to use some very airy fairy words there, um, to create a space in which that conversation is more likely to go well. Um, it's great to start with us, right? To just say, hey, hey, I've started this conversation with myself. And first of all, just opening the door for us, you know, immediately gets us into a different space, right? It's no longer a blame conversation. It's a conversation about, hey, here's this thing that we all do that I didn't know that we did. And I've
Hmm.
been exploring it for myself. I wonder if we could explore it together. Would you be up for that? And I think that that could be a really wonderful way to initiate that conversation. But I think it's got to start with us looking within and seeing, hey, I do this, and I do it everywhere. We all do. It's something we all share, and it's important to know that going in. Um, yeah, so that it's not that doesn't have that finger pointing mentality to it.
Yeah, because it's very easy to become a victim in a relationship and blame the other person for
Right.
how things are going. Um, but really, a lot of the friction that's created in relationship is that I have an expectation, you're not meeting it. I'm feeling the friction within myself.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. You know what it comes back to largely for me is um, an understanding, but not an intellectual understanding, kind of an experiential, spiritual understanding, if that makes any sense. uh, uh, where we just have a deeper capacity for understanding what's going on for us, which allows us to understand what's going on in relationship. Because if it's going on for me, it's probably going on for them. Um, in in content, not form necessarily. You know, like we'd have different. We're going to be thinking different thoughts. Obviously, like I said, we all have a different, unique fingerprint perspective of the world. Um, but what that's built on is largely the same for all of us. You know, with the source of it, so it's very deceiving. It's like, oh, this person, it's a very different internal structure from me, but it's all coming from the same place. The uh, you know, the I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, and it really says, and I think we actually talked about this on one of our last previous shows, but can really only come from two places: love or fear, or in the language of A Course in Miracles, it would talk about the ego mind or the mind of God, right? And we're all coming from one of those two places, and it's helpful to know that it doesn't have to be more complicated than that.
Hmm. That it
So
really is just that simple, isn't it?
it's, you know, simplicity takes us home. It's the complexity of the world and of our own thinking that we really get lost in. Thinking it's real, investing in it. You know, if it's this complicated, surely, you know, there must be some truth to it, right? Well, not always in my experience. We can fabricate some pretty crazy ideas and believe them. It's it's just, again, we don't have to necessarily do anything with the ideas, or in this case, the expectations or the agreements. Uh, we just need to understand what's going on. Hey, this is happening, whether I like it or not. I will be having expectations of you. If you're in a relationship, you have expectations for that person, whether you know it or not. So you might as well know it. And you know, what's the cheesy but true saying? Knowledge shall set you free, or the truth shall set you free. Right. So Harold, I wonder if we could take you in the direction of business, because we've been focusing more on romantic relationships or intimate relationships.
Yeah, you had some good ideas about how this also translates to either our own businesses or the whole co-workers, boss employee relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that you notice if you work with enough people, or you just have been on planet Earth long enough, is, is that a lot of people harbor a lot of resentment for people in their work setting, regardless of how it is, if it's employee, employer, buyer, seller, um, middleman, it could go any number of ways, really, all ways. Oftentimes, there's resentment on one end or the other. Oftentimes, because there has been no conversation, so no spoken word about the transaction that's going to take place. And if there has been, it oftentimes hasn't been in any kind of useful detail, right? And so what we do is we have these ideas about how we think it should go or it's supposed to go or how we want it to go. And then the other person has ideas, which almost certainly, again, aren't going to match the first person's. And if both parties don't know that, you know, people are going to get upset inevitably when it doesn't go the first person's way or it doesn't go the other person's way, or maybe it won't go either person's way. And so you guess what? You get to both blame the other person for it not going your way. And so what's going on there is we have an unspoken expectation. We have no agreement between the two parties. There's no spoken, detailed agreement about. It could be anything. It could be the price of the, of how much. If you're hiring somebody, how much they're going to get paid. Sometimes that conversation doesn't even take place about salary or wage.
I think that's a really common thing when someone first gets employed. One of the most common questions is, well, how much are you making? And they're like, well, they have like a vague idea, but or sometimes not even. So even just being clear about what the number exchange is.
Right. So and just to add on top of that, I love you said be clear, because be clear for yourself as best you can how you'd like it to go so that you can communicate that. And negotiation's part of business, right? You might not negotiate exactly the way you want it, but if you agree to terms, make sure you're agreeing to those terms. Right? So you be clear, you make sure those are you got there together. In other words, it wasn't just ships passing in the night. It wasn't, because there's just all this unspoken stuff that we hallucinate that conversation somehow happened somewhere along the line, and then we get upset when there's violations of that unspoken agreement. Well, there was no agreement if it wasn't spoken. So you damn well better say what you want. Otherwise, it's on you. If you get upset, it's on you. You agreed to it in your mind, or you went along with it. Let's go with that. You went along with it in your mind without making an agreement, a spoken agreement, and it's key. It's key to think. Now, it doesn't mean everything's going to go perfectly in that relationship, but at least you have something, a foundation to go back to say, hey, here's what we both sat down, talked about, and then agreed to. Can you still live up to that agreement? Because then you get to have that conversation, as opposed to the conversation about what the heck's going on, right? The totally befuddled conversation.
It's interesting because one of the things that you just reminded me of is often we'll have the unspoken expectation, and then the other person's not holding up their part of the bargain of this unspoken expectation,
That was
and
never
then
made in
we
the first place.
it was never made in the first place, and then we get upset because they should just know what your unspoken expectation is. So we have an expectation that they should know what our unspoken expectation is, and it becomes this layered, not so tasty cake really quickly.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I talked about it in our conversation before we started the show was um, the illusion of an agreement. And so it's to each person, and that's why this goes largely unexplored by most people most of the time. It looks like in our mind there was an agreement made for whatever reason, because we conjure all sorts of crazy stuff in our heads. Um, but it looks to us some way, somehow, like either that conversation took place or the conversation doesn't need to take place because they can see it too. And so there, you got to start there in all the relationships. Know your own mind. Know that you will undoubtedly have expectations for everybody you ever meet. Even if it's a brief, like we have expectations for strangers walking on the street. Like you won't bump into me. If you do, that's a violation of our civil agreement or something, right? Or you won't cut me off in traffic. And if you do, I'm going to flip you off or, whatever it is. Um, we have expectations for everybody, and it's not about them, it's about us. It's about our own mind and how it works.
I was having a conversation with a client this week, and they realized that because it's funny how this works, where you see one thing in one area of your life and then you start seeing it elsewhere, right? It happens
Right.
all the time in our work. But so this person realized that they had an expectation with the person that they're living with. So the person that they're living with made a commitment and and then didn't keep it. Uh, and this person has the expectation that that commitment is going to be met because this person believes very strongly that if you make a commitment, you got to stick to it. And then they found that it is happening at work as well, that people at work were committing to something and then they wouldn't do it. But then this person's expectation was that they would keep their commitment. Now, all of us would say, well, of course, if you're going to make a commitment, all of us kind of had that. Most of us have that expectation that if you say you're committed to something, that you're going to follow through on it. Uh, but that's not the point. The point is the friction that is then created inside of the person based on the expectation that isn't being met.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's key because it's within us. That friction doesn't necessarily exist out there, right?
Absolutely not. The friction is within us. And the friction is where the expectation, or as we were talking, I think last week, how we have an agreement or the expectation of an agreement, but the agreement isn't coming back. So I expect you to keep your commitment, but you haven't agreed that you're going to keep your commitment.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
and
then
that's
there's this,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you, because that's a lot of my work that I do with clients is in that realm of the friction within you.
Mm,
Because
yeah,
most of my work is, that mirror conversation where the outer world is a mirror of our inner world, and and the friction exists in you. So this is where we are. You can try and make other people conform to what you want, so as to not have that friction. But really, the goal is to move into that friction and find out what's really going on.
right. And you'll find if you go that direction, your relationships will be far more fulfilling, right? Because it won't be this authoritative, I get what I want, therefore I feel good,
Yeah.
relationship. It will be a true collaboration
Yeah.
if there's an agreement. Um, and that's the key, is just make an agreement. And here's the cool thing about that: if somebody in your life uh, that you consistently make clear spoken agreements with, if they consistently break those agreements, guess what? You get to have a conversation with them about whether or not they get to continue to be in your life or not. Because it's very difficult, and we'll have different thresholds with different people for that kind of thing. um, but it's very difficult to be in a long-term relationship with anybody who can't reliably stick to their word, right? So you get to have a conversation about them. Hey, I noticed you don't reliably do what you say. Now that's different. That's very different from, I made up that there was an agreement and there never was, and then going from there, right? Everything goes to heck from that point, right?
Mhm.
But making the decision, oh, I need to leave because this person can't keep their word, when there was never a discussion in the first place, or at least never a clean one, never a clear, useful one.
Mhm.
And so that's an important place to also look, is, did I have that conversation? Was an agreement made at any point in time? and and it's okay to rework agreements too, right? They don't have to be once and for all of eternity,
Yeah,
right?
because they're made up, they can change. We can make up new agreements.
Yeah, it's not a covenant with God, right?
Yeah,
it's it's an agreement between two people. It's fluid, just like our expectations are. Now, it's helpful to let people in on the fluidity of that as best you can, right? To
that's
say, hey,
part of a healthy relationship.
exactly, say, my preferences here have changed. I wonder if we could rework our agreement. And, that can be a great place to part ways peacefully, or rework your agreement and continue, whether it's business or romance or with your children. You can make agreements with your children. And, this is just coming to mind, but what an agreement, at the heart of an agreement, is the acknowledgement that we don't control that other person. It's saying, I respect you as another human being of your own, under your own power, to be able to make an agreement with me. I'm not this figure that has authority over your life. And we actually talked about that. I can't remember if it was last week or in
Yeah, I
private,
can't either.
but
That's ringing a bell though.
just the part about how it's hidden, and
How you can choose to agree or not agree. The other person can choose to agree or not agree.
right, absolutely. It's where it looks like there's no choice, where it looks like um, uh, they do have control over me. That's an illusion too. And if you see through that, then you can see through it to the point where you can say, hey, let's make an agreement here. Let's have a discussion. Um, and if it doesn't, if the other person's not willing to partake, then um, that's a great point in the relationship to evaluate whether you want to continue on in the form that relationship is currently in. So you say, you know, do I want to stay in it given that they don't want to have this conversation? And then you get to choose, right? We get to choose. And so it's all coming back to us, right? It starts with the realization and the understanding. I'm creating stuff with my mind, and now I know about it. And I don't have to do anything with that. I can take that into account. And if you do that, your relationships are just going to get more and more wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up, Harold. Any parting shots you'd like to add?
You know, I know for me, one of the most valuable things has just been to notice what I'm up to and then bring it forward so it's in the open for everyone to see.
Hmm.
Whatever environment it's in, whoever it's with, that's the
Yeah.
bring it forward. And it creates a space, an open space where um, a healthy relationship can occur.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like,
I think all of these conversations ultimately are going to be about shining the light within. Right.
hmm
It's self discovery. It's self exploration. That's what this all is about. And the more we understand about that, uh, yeah, ourselves, our own minds, the more light, the more awareness has been shined, shunned.
Sean.
English is my first language. But I was never a grammar teacher, so okay. Yeah, the more light we shine within, the better and better our life's going to get. Um, it's not as dark and scary in there as we've all been taught.
hmm
So, so yeah. So just to remind folks, if you've enjoyed this conversation, this is going to be a fairly regular show, coaching from the heart, and so. For now, you can tune in every Thursday at what is it, 5 p.m. Pacific?
Yep,
For you in lovely Terrace, Canada, is that correct?
that is correct.
Yeah, and I am in the beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so, yeah, if you're interested in this conversation sparks your interest, you want to work with us on a deeper level, either Harold or myself, please reach out to us. You can find me at my website, www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And Harold, where can we find you?
Well, my blog is heart to hand .blog.wordpress. Heart to hand blog at WordPress. And then I have a Facebook page, The Awakening Heart. Um, I think the URL says facebook.com/Harold Feddersen, The Awakening Heart
Hmm,
/.
fantastic. And so uh, we're going to sign off with that. And until next time, with all the love in the world, have a wonderful evening.